Today, we delve into a story that echoes with the thunder of defiance and the shadow of betrayal. The attempted arrest of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young and fearless leader of Burkina Faso. In a world where power struggles and hidden agendas often operate behind closed doors, this event has stirred not only political waters, but also the hearts of millions who believe in sovereignty, justice, and truth. The attempted arrest of Captain Ibrahim Traoré was not just a sudden, isolated act. It was the culmination of a series of calculated moves by both internal and external actors threatened by his growing influence and defiant leadership style. To understand the hidden forces behind this attempt, one must look beyond Burkina Faso's borders and deep into the network of political interests, economic control, and ideological conflicts that have historically plagued the African continent. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a military officer who rose to power in Burkina Faso in 2022, has increasingly positioned himself as a symbol of resistance against neocolonialism and foreign intervention. His rhetoric and policies have frequently challenged the long-standing dominance of Western powers in the region, especially France, whose presence in West Africa has been met with growing resistance from a population yearning for sovereignty. Under Traoré's leadership, Burkina Faso ended military agreements with France, expelled French troops, and shifted toward cooperation with other nations such as Russia, Turkey, and China. These decisions were not made in a vacuum. They directly impacted powerful interests that had long benefited from maintaining political control and economic access in the region. The removal of foreign troops and the restriction of Western influence threatened a geopolitical balance that had allowed certain governments and multinational corporations to exploit Burkina Faso's resources, particularly gold and other minerals, with little accountability. And Traoré's nationalization efforts and focus on regional self-reliance stood in stark opposition to the system that had kept countries like Burkina Faso in a cycle of dependency. Such moves inevitably invited retaliation from both internal elites with vested interests and foreign actors seeking to preserve their foothold. One of the major players behind the scenes is the network of intelligence operations and covert influence often used by powerful nations to manage their interests abroad. Historically, coups and regime changes in Africa have been linked to such networks operating through local proxies, opposition figures, or military insiders who are cultivated over time to act in favor of external agendas. The attempt to arrest Traoré may well have been orchestrated through similar mechanisms, utilizing divisions within Burkina Faso's own military and political circles. Whispers of dissatisfaction among certain officers, likely fueled and funded by external actors, created a fertile ground for an internal move against the captain. The timing of the attempt also coincides with a broader regional shift in West Africa, where countries like Mali and Niger have also experienced military takeovers led by figures with strong anti-Western rhetoric. This emerging alliance of military governments represents a serious threat to traditional geopolitical alignments, especially those maintained through organizations like ECOWAS, which has frequently been accused of being influenced by external powers. Traoré's open criticism of ECOWAS and support for regional cooperation independent of Western direction only amplified the urgency among his opponents to curb his influence before it could spread further. Adding complexity to the situation is the role of media and information warfare. Misinformation campaigns, both from within and outside Burkina Faso, have aimed to portray Traoré as unstable, authoritarian, or under foreign influence himself. These narratives, often lacking evidence, are part of a broader psychological operation aimed at eroding public trust and justifying intervention. Such tactics have been used repeatedly across Africa and Latin America to soften public resistance ahead of coups or externally supported regime changes. The confusion and doubt sound by these narratives can make an unlawful act, like an arrest or removal, appear necessary or even desirable in the eyes of an uninformed public. Another key layer in understanding the hidden forces is the economic dimension. Burkina Faso's wealth and natural resources makes it a strategic target for international companies, especially in the mining and energy sectors. Contracts signed under previous regimes often heavily favored foreign corporations, granting them vast profits with minimal returns to the country itself. Traoré's administration began pushing for more equitable agreements and even hinted at reviewing and renegotiating old contracts. This was not welcomed by the corporations involved, many of which maintain powerful lobbying arms capable of influencing governments and intelligence agencies in their home countries. The possibility of losing billions in profits would have provided ample motivation to destabilize or remove a leader seen as a threat to the status quo. Within Burkina Faso, not all elites supported Traoré's nationalist agenda. There are factions within the military, the business class, and political remnants from past administrations who either felt sidelined or threatened by the changes. These domestic actors often act as the local hands for foreign plans, creating a bridge between international interests and local execution. The coordination between these groups, fueled by shared incentives and facilitated by financial support, may have led to the planning and attempted execution of Traoré's arrest. There is also the ideological conflict between his Pan-African vision and the Western liberal democratic model, often promoted as the only legitimate form of governance. Traoré, like other leaders in the region, has emphasized sovereignty, cultural identity, and regional solidarity over aligning with Western values and institutions. This stance has been interpreted by critics as regressive or dangerous, but to many in Africa, it represents a long, overdue reclaiming of autonomy. The ideological threat that Traoré poses to Western dominance is significant, especially if his ideas take root and inspire similar movements elsewhere. The fear of a domino effect, where more countries follow Burkina Faso's path, may have been a driving force behind the attempt to neutralize him early. Ultimately, the attempt to arrest Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just about a man. It is about a movement, a direction, and a threat to entrenched systems of power. The hidden forces involved represent a convergence of geopolitical, economic, ideological, and local interests determined to maintain their influence. Understanding these forces requires recognizing the complexity of modern power struggles, where arrests and coups are not merely military actions, but expressions of deeper, more global conflicts. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's rapid rise to prominence has marked a significant turning point not only for Burkina Faso but for the broader Pan-African movement. At just 34 years old when he assumed power, Traoré captured the attention of both supporters and critics by embodying a new generation of African leadership, bold, unapologetically nationalist, and determined to dismantle the lingering structures of neocolonial influence. His leadership has become a rallying point for a wave of youth-driven resistance across West Africa, reflecting a growing appetite for genuine sovereignty, unity, and self-determination among African nations. Traoré's influence began to surge following the political instability in Burkina Faso that saw 2 coups in 2022. The second coup, which brought him to power, was not simply a military takeover but a reaction to widespread frustration over insecurity, economic stagnation, and the perceived subservience of past leaders to foreign interests. His arrival was met with a rare mix of relief and hope, especially among the youth, who saw in him a leader willing to speak the truth about foreign exploitation, internal corruption, and the failures of regional institutions. His speeches and public appearances often emphasize Pan-African unity and the need for African nations to break free from the chains of dependency. This message has resonated deeply across a continent long subjected to externally imposed systems and economic models that fail to prioritize the interests of the local population. Unlike many traditional African leaders who shy away from open confrontation with Western powers, Traoré has been direct in his criticisms, especially of France and the broader Western presence in West Africa. This clarity of stance, whether strategic or ideological, has fueled his popularity not just in Burkina Faso, but in countries like Mali, Niger, Guinea, and even far beyond the region. One of the defining features of Traoré's influence is his rejection of the idea that African countries must follow Western political and economic prescriptions to achieve progress. His administration has made moves to strengthen relations with non-Western powers such as Russia, China, and Turkey, not necessarily out of ideological alignment, but as part of a multipolar approach that seeks to reduce dependency on any one source of external influence. This realignment has been seen as a geopolitical threat by Western actors, especially as it comes amid the broader trend of African nations asserting their independence from former colonial powers. In this context, Traoré's rise is not simply the story of a young soldier who took power. It represents the crystallization of long, simmering resentment toward global systems that have kept Africa divided and economically marginalized. His emphasis on reclaiming national resources, ending exploitive contracts, and restoring pride in African identity is inherently Pan-African. He speaks not only for Burkina Faso, but for a larger movement that questions the legitimacy of post-colonial arrangements that benefit the few while leaving the many in poverty and insecurity. His growing influence has been amplified by a strong social media presence, where images and videos of him in military fatigues, walking among ordinary citizens, and delivering fiery speeches against neocolonialism have gone viral. For many Africans, especially young people, Traoré is more than a president. He is a symbol of what is possible when leadership aligns with the people rather than foreign agendas. This popular imagery has helped expand his reach far beyond traditional political platforms and into the hearts and minds of a generation disillusioned with broken promises. Yet, this growing influence has come at a cost. It has made him a target not only for internal dissenters who feel threatened by his anti-corruption drive, but also for foreign actors who view his stance as destabilizing to their interests in the region. His support for regional solidarity outside Western frameworks has raised alarm among international institutions and governments that rely on Africa's continued fragmentation to maintain control over resources and markets. Traoré's support for cooperation among military-led governments in West Africa, such as those in Mali and Niger, is viewed as a dangerous precedent by proponents of Western-style liberal democracy, especially when such alliances promote economic independence and military resistance to foreign intervention. His influence has also redefined the political language in Burkina Faso and neighboring countries. Where previous leaders spoke in the language of diplomacy and partnership, Traoré uses terms like dignity, sovereignty, and resistance. This shift is not merely rhetorical, it signifies a deeper ideological transformation in how governance, development, and international relations are conceived. It suggests that Africa can chart its own course, shaped by its own priorities and historical experiences, rather than externally imposed models. Such a vision directly challenges the political elites and institutions that have long profited from maintaining the status quo. Another aspect of his rising influence is the role he has played in demystifying leadership. Traoré has adopted an accessible, down-to-earth approach in contrast to the distant, the privileged aura cultivated by many African heads of state. He has been seen mingling with soldiers on the front lines, engaging directly with local communities, and even attending events without heavy security. These gestures, while symbolic, have cemented his image as a man of the people and further deepened his connection with the masses. In a region where distrust in political leadership is high, this form of leadership has proven incredibly powerful. Furthermore, Traoré's rise is influencing other young African leaders, activists, and political movements. His assertiveness is inspiring conversations about alternative governance models that prioritize local control, regional integration, and economic justice. While critics argue that his military background undermines democratic principles, supporters counter that existing democratic frameworks in many African countries are themselves compromised by corruption, foreign manipulation, and elite capture. For these supporters, Traoré represents a reset, a new kind of leadership that rejects colonial legacies and embraces self-determination in both word and deed. This ideological wave, if it continues to grow, could have far-reaching implications. It threatens the traditional alliances that have long defined Africa's relationship with the West and opens the door to new forms of cooperation that prioritize African interests. The fear among foreign powers is not only that Traoré will remain in power, but that his model of governance and resistance will spread, inspiring a continental shift that redefines Africa's role on the global stage. The attempted arrest of Captain Ibrahim Traoré sent shockwaves throughout Burkina Faso, sparking an immediate and passionate response from the public. The reaction was not only a reflection of the people's support for Traoré as an individual, but also a broader signal of how deeply his leadership has resonated with the national psyche. In a country long plagued by political instability, foreign interference, and socioeconomic hardship, Traoré's rise represented a break from the past. His nationalist, Pan-African stance had captured the hearts of a population hungry for dignity and self-determination. When rumors and reports emerged about an attempted move against him, the public's reaction was swift, emotional, and in many cases defiant. Protests erupted in several cities, with citizens taking to the streets to express their rejection of any effort to remove Traoré from power. People waved national flags, displayed images of the captain, and chanted slogans supporting his anti-imperialist policies. The message was clear: the people saw in him a representation of their struggle for sovereignty, and any attack on him was perceived as an attack on the nation itself. In Ouagadougou, the capital, large crowds formed near military installations and government buildings, effectively serving as a civilian shield. This spontaneous mobilization reflected not just political loyalty, but a deeper cultural shift in which the population viewed itself as an active participant in national defense. Not just a passive observer of political events, the grassroots response was also amplified by social media platforms, where videos, messages, and posters in support of Traoré circulated widely. Hashtags calling for national unity and warning against betrayal trended across the region. Influencers, activists, and even musicians lent their voices to the cause, framing the attempted arrest as part of a broader conspiracy to reverse the gains made since Traoré took power. In an environment where distrust of foreign actors runs deep, the narrative that external forces were behind the incident found fertile ground. People who might have previously been politically disengaged began speaking out, joining rallies, and expressing solidarity. This surge of civic participation reinforced a growing sense of national ownership and vigilance. The attempted arrest also revealed the extent to which Traoré had succeeded in shifting the national consciousness towards self-determination. His speeches and policies had emphasized sovereignty, unity, and resistance to neocolonial influence, and these themes now became rallying cries for the public. Citizens, particularly youth, began to frame themselves as defenders of a national project, one that sought to reclaim control over resources, governance, and cultural identity. In this way, the event acted as a catalyst for deeper political engagement, particularly among groups that had long felt marginalized or disillusioned by politics. Another important aspect of the public reaction was the symbolic significance of Traoré as a generational figure. Many young Burkinabés see in him someone who shares their frustrations and dreams, someone who has dared to challenge a system many believe has failed them. His age, style of communication, and proximity to the people have made him relatable in ways few leaders have achieved. When news of the attempted arrest spread, it was not merely interpreted as a political maneuver. It was taken personally by many who saw Traoré's leadership as an extension of their own aspirations. This deep identification created a powerful emotional bond that quickly translated into mobilization. The incident also tested the cohesion of Burkina Faso's security forces. Rather than dividing under pressure, much of the military and law enforcement community appeared to remain loyal to the leadership. Statements from within the army reaffirmed support for Traoré, and images circulated of soldiers embracing citizens during protests, further reinforcing the narrative of unity between the people and their defenders. This sense of solidarity between the armed forces and the civilian population stood in stark contrast to the atmosphere of fear and suppression that often accompanies political unrest in other contexts. It also served as a warning to those who might have considered taking further action against Traoré. Any attempt to remove him would likely provoke not just political consequences, but widespread public resistance. The broader impact on national unity was significant. In a country where ethnic, religious, and regional divides have often been exploited by political actors, the collective defense of Traoré transcended these lines. People from diverse backgrounds came together under a shared banner of sovereignty and resistance. For a nation that has endured cycles of conflict and fragmentation, this moment of unity was both rare and powerful. It demonstrated that a common vision, if effectively articulated and embodied by leadership, can overcome deep-rooted divisions. The attempted arrest so catalyzed discussions in villages, schools, marketplaces, and places of worship as citizens debated the country's future and the kind of leadership they wanted to preserve. Radio shows and community forums buzzed with commentary and analysis, revealing a population that was not only emotionally invested, but intellectually engaged. Traoré's vision had sparked a movement that was now being internalized by the people themselves. The political space was no longer confined to elites or officials. It had expanded to include ordinary citizens who felt empowered to protect their collective destiny. Moreover, the response sent a strong message to external actors who might have hoped that removing Traoré would be a quick or quiet affair. The overwhelming public support made it clear that any such move would face immense resistance, both on the streets and in the national discourse. It also signaled that Burkina Faso's people were no longer willing to accept foreign domination or elite manipulation as the norm. They had tasted the idea of sovereignty not just as an abstract principle, but as a lived experience under Traoré's rule. The population's reaction transformed what could have been a moment of political instability into a moment of reaffirmed national resolve. This mass mobilization and unity in the face of perceived betrayal may have lasting consequences for the country's political culture. It has set a precedent where leadership is not protected merely by institutions or armed forces, but by the people themselves. The social contract between Traoré and the population was not just reaffirmed. It was strengthened, potentially deterring future plots and empowering other leaders to prioritize the will of the people over external approval. The event also showed that national sovereignty is not just the concern of politicians or military commanders. It is a cause that can animate and unite an entire nation when genuinely embraced and defended.